This historic homestead and farm has links back to the first European settlement in Australia, the development of merino sheep, and the infamous Rum Rebellion. It's one of many treasures in the Hills Shire of Sydney. So why was it nearly bulldozed to make way for one of these? I've added chapters to this video, so if you'd like to go straight to the answer or to some other section of the video, just hover over the YouTube timeline and click the chapter you want to go to. Today I'll tell you about one of my favourite places in the Hills District, Bella Vista Farm. This property is perhaps unique in Australia. It contains not just a historic homestead, but remnants of the original surrounding farm, including outbuildings, slab fencing, paddocks, mature indigenous vegetation, and cultural plantings such as the bunyip pines down the Southern Drive. In its entirety, it represents a typical farming community from the 1800s, surrounded by 21 hectares of parkland. Now I'll show you my favourite drone footage of Bella Vista Farm, recorded in that magic light just after sunrise. While the video is running, I'll give you my brief history of the farm. If you already know the history or my voice conflicts with the serenity of this beautiful location, just turn the volume down. I'll begin by putting the context of Bella Vista Farm within the larger setting of what we now call Australia. The first Australians arrived some 50,000 years ago, perhaps more. The first white settlement was established about 49,765 years later in 1788. That settlement was where Circular Quay is today. About half of the 1,400 passengers who arrived on the first fleet were convicts, sentenced in England to serve their time in Australia. The rest were the crew of the 11 ships, plus military men, officials, wives and children. Beginning in 1794, just 6 years after the first fleet arrived, several land grants were being made in the area now known as Bella Vista Farm. By 1801, ownership of the grants had consolidated under the emancipist Richard Fitzgerald. In December of 1801, the infamous John Macarthur and his pastoralist wife Elizabeth bought the land. Macarthur is best known today as the pioneer of the merino sheep breed. But how did he become such a wealthy and powerful figure in the early days of the New South Wales colony? Macarthur had arrived in 1790 as a penniless lieutenant in the New South Wales Marine Corps. 5 years later, he was an influential landholder. His 500 acres of prime land produced goods he sold to the settlers and the government at extortionate prices, adding an astonishing £400 a year to his wealth. All this was a result of racketeering. The Marine Corps held monopoly control of importing and distributing rum in the colony. They became known as the Rum Corps, led by Major Francis Gross with Macarthur at his side. In 1808, the Rum Corps marched on Government House, arrested Governor Bligh and declared martial law. The junta then installed Macarthur as colonial secretary. There's so much more to this story. Just Google the term infamous John Macarthur. But back to the story of Bella Vista Farm. In November 1800, a man called George Sutter arrived in Sydney with the ambition of starting a new life with his wife Sarah. In a curious connection with John Macarthur, Sutter was later jailed for 6 months after daring to complain about the corrupt junta. By 1807, he had commercialised orange orchards on Chelsea Farm. Ownership of the Bella Vista land continued to change hands until purchased by William Pearce in 1842. Pearce noted the success of fruit orchards in the area, and these came to dominate both his efforts and his wealth. Bella Vista Farm was to become the largest orchard in Australia by the 1890s. The first stage of the homestead is believed to have been completed by the time of William's death in 1865. He and his descendants retained ownership through to 1949. In 1950, the Pearce family sold Bella Vista Farm to the North Sydney Brick and Tile Company, later known as Norbrick. The quarry site was in the southwest corner of the farm, adjacent to what is now Norbrick Drive. Then, in 1974, the land now known as Bella Vista Farm was bought by the Metropolitan Water, Sewerage and Drainage Board. They needed additional water storage for developments planned for the area, including Norwest Business Park and housing subdivisions. The altitude of the land containing the farm and homestead site made it ideal for this purpose, but the historical site would have to be bulldozed to make way for a huge water storage tank, header tower and other infrastructure. During this time, the Blacktown Historical Society had become aware of the significance of the farm. They lobbied the state government and the State Heritage Office, and in 1979 an interim conservation order was granted. The Sydney Metropolitan Water, Sewerage and Drainage Board then dropped their plans to demolish Bella Vista Farm and moved the site of their planned water storage and tower to the adjacent hill, 350 metres northeast. A permanent conservation order was granted in 1997, and the land was transferred to Hills Shire Council, now the Hills Shire Council. In 2006, the Rotary Club of Norwest Sunrise realised the farm was derelict and decaying and would soon reach a point of no return. They formed Friends of Bella Vista Farm, approached the council, and began the Herculean task of clearing the lantana that had overgrown the farm. Then, in 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Surprisingly, this proved to be a blessing. The federal government was splashing stimulus money around to avoid recession, so the Friends of Bella Vista Farm put a proposal to the government and was offered $900,000, enabling some of the early clearing and stabilisation work. As of today, the homestead and outbuildings have been stabilised and some areas of the homestead restored. Bella Vista Farm is now open for tours on the first Sunday of each month. You'll find a link in the video description. The Friends of Bella Vista Farm aim to preserve the site into the future, and to do so they need volunteers. Check out the video description for information.